All right, we are live. Welcome back to another episode of Ten Horse Money YouTube channel, Tuesday Night Live, and it's good to be back. Good to be back. Man, it's crazy times right now in fishing as far as just the drama plus the conditions and stuff. I know coming off of Lake of the Ozarks, it was like ice up until like 3 days before the Derby down there, and then Kentucky Lake's been like rolling high and muddy, and we were supposed to have a BFL down there last week, and the conditions were like the lows were in the single digits and the teens, and then I think Moores, we were supposed to go out of Moores, and from what I heard, Moores froze up, so I'm glad they called those BFLs off. They got two more, they stacked them on Saturday and Sunday coming up the following week. So I'm looking forward to that. So it's always kind of nice to, kind of save on travel and lodging and food and all that back to back. But how's Kentucky? We're just gonna jump right in, man. How's Kentucky
for
Lake?
Sure.
How's Kentucky Lake right now?
It sucks. And everybody I've talked to, it's kind of sucked too. It seems like it's not very good. Even local guys saying that it's going to be a super tough tournament. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I mean, you said it was frozen not that long ago, but I mean, the water temp was mid to upper 40s. I saw 50 today. So, it's not super cold, but it's low. And I think that probably has a big effect on it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, it's weird how you see those warmer water temperatures, especially from what we've been coming in. And for me, like the other day I was out fishing and I got back in this little cove and I saw 50 degrees. And I'm like, 50 degrees. Wow. It just sounds like it's getting ready to pop. 50 degrees is like, it kind of opens up some different bait selections and maybe some moving baits and stuff like that. But we're still coming, it's still wintertime basically. And we kind of got to keep our mind, and, you don't want to get too far ahead of the fishes, I guess what I'm getting.
It seems like we're behind though right now. Like, just overall, this part of the country seems like we're a little behind with that last big push of winter weather that we had that kind of slowed us down a little bit. So
I would agree with that too. Like last week at Lake of the Ozarks, I haven't really seen this before in March, but I mean the water temps were 36 to 40 at the very warmest towards the end of the week, and a lot of those fish were like grouped up like they would be in the winter, like on the points and things. It wasn't like you could just see those fish all over the transition areas. It was like they were all stacked up on one spot, and then you wouldn't see another one for a while, So that just it seems to me like that is true winter pattern more than anything.
Yeah, that's true. It's I don't know. We got a lot of the lakes that we fish around here have grass, so it seems like they're always kind of spread out in the grass. But there are certain areas where you go through, you fish for quite a while if you're fishing shallow and not get a bite. Then all of a sudden you might catch 2 or 3 or 4 in a little area, and then you think you figured something out, and then you go for a long time and not get a bite. And so I guess that's kind of happening around here. JB and I live in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, so we fish over in southern Illinois a lot near Carbondale. So a lot of those lakes over there are what we consider our home lakes. So we're 4 hours from Lake of the Ozarks, and we're only like 2 hours from Kentucky Lake.
That's not too bad.
No, where you guys going out of for the opens?
Paris.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the mixed BFLs are going out of Moores, so more mid-lake, I guess.
I would rather take out of the Moores, but that's kind of the end of the lake that I kind of know better anyway.
Yeah. What's your experience on Kentucky Lake?
The first time I came here was in 2019, and we came here like every year, whether it was like a MLF event or they would have like big bass tournaments in the fall, which was really bad. But it was like the worst years of Kentucky Lake, and I really didn't learn anything at all. So it's really been the past like 2 years that I've been able to actually learn and figure out how to fish Kentucky Lake. So it's
Was that in college, Cole?
Yeah, all those tournaments in college. Yeah.
I gotcha.
So that was 20, like 19, 20, 21.
Yeah, it was 2019 through 2022, 23.
Yeah, that was the like.
Oh, that was
That
the
wasn't the
horrible.
absolute worst years, but that was like the middle of the worst years.
It was pretty bad. It was pretty bad for sure.
Yeah, I know people that sold their property on Kentucky Lake because they just got tired of fishing and not getting a bite. I mean, you could go out for 8 hours and not even getting a bite at one time. Now it's definitely changed for the better. Let me see. I threw out a question there to the folks in the chat, and the question was, "What's the best jerkbait on the market?" Curtis says the Vision 110 +1 Junior. Stunna. You have to second that one, Cole.
I do.
Yeah. I don't. Is there a best one though? At the end of the day, like, or is it what they're biting on that day? That's the one bait in my arsenal that I'll have 15 of them laying on the deck of the boat, tangled up by the end of the day, from a plethora of manufacturers.
Yeah, I always throw a lot of different jerk baits, and it does seem like that maybe the action more than anything, because the different body styles makes a difference. And so I have a lot of colors, but I don't think that matters that much as that action does, especially when it's cold, because you're not working it as fast, so those fish actually get to sit there and look at it a little bit. So
how often do you change your cadence up between
every cast.
Every cast, I mean, until you got something figured out.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends really on the fish. And to me, most of the time you have to keep up with the fish. So if they're coming in hot, you have to work it hot, and sometimes you have to work it slow to get them to see it. But then after that, I'm just working it based on how the fish is reacting. Now, if it's super cold like last week at Lake Ozarks, sometimes those fish, they would just move so slow that you would just have to let it sit there. And I hate doing that because they just get to sit there and look at it. But, a lot of times when the water's that cold, they will never catch up to it if you, overwork it. But then again, they'll see it too well and then decide not to eat it. So I think it's kind of that's the hardest time, I think, whenever it's really cold, because there's kind of that in between where they're just moving so slow.
That just reminded me of like pre-forward-facing sonar days where
right.
the 20 or 30, literally the 20 or 30 second pause, and then you'd be just watching your line. All of a sudden, your line would tick and lean into a 5-pounder on a jerkbait. Like,
right.
Either he was sitting there, or he was just happened to swim by a random, bait sitting in the water. We don't know what was happening, but
what do you think? What do you think, Cole, about like a bait that's suspending versus a slow sink? Because I know, like the Stunna, it's a slow sink bait, but what's your thoughts on times when you would use one over the other?
Well, like this week, the fish were pretty deep. I mean, most of mine, for like a regular jerk bait, most of them were like 10 to 18 or 20. So that's pretty deep to be throwing a jerk bait, especially when it's windy like it was. But the problem is with the weighted jerk bait, whenever it's this cold, is that because everyone's like, "Oh, did you throw a weighted jerk bait?" No, because those fish move so slow that it sinks to the bottom by the time they actually get to it, and then they're never going to eat it at that point, or they didn't anyway. So, like for me, like a true suspending jerk bait, obviously is best whenever it's super cold, so that you can just let it sit there and wait for them to come to it. And the Stunna, so what I do a lot of times is I'll put braided split rings on there, and so it lightens it up just a hair to where it actually suspends really well. And so that's what I was doing this week, and then just making really long casts and letting my line sink to get it down there. And then whenever it gets into like I would say low to mid 40s, a sinking jerk bait is just a lot more efficient, because you can actually get to the fish and work it fast, and they're going to eat it. You don't have to let it sit there for 10 seconds just for them to swim 2 feet, So I think it's more about being efficient than anything, because you still want to keep that bait kind of level in the water column. You don't want it just continually falling to the bottom. If anything, you want it coming up a little bit when you're working it, just like a shad would be running away. So I kind of use it for efficiency more than anything. And if I want a bait to get deep, I'll, make a long cast, let my line sink. So it takes a little while, but I feel like that's just the most natural presentation. Unless, you're trying to get a jerk bait super deep, then obviously you'll need to weight it thin. But
yeah, that's something I didn't notice. I mean, I probably should have noticed this, but until I kind of started watching jerkbaits on forward-facing sonar, how much your line pulls that bait down, especially if you're fishing with fluorocarbon, because you can, we all like flip our little jerkbait out, pull it down, and watch it, and it's suspending. Well, you've only got 5 feet of line in the water or something. Well, when you make a long cast and you've got 80 feet of water or 80 feet of line in the water, and you let it sink, that fluorocarbon's dense and it's slowly pulling that jerkbait down. That's and I should have known that too years ago, because a lot of times you let it sit and you think it's suspending at 5-6 feet, but then you're hitting the bottom or something, or you're catching the tops of grass, and obviously it was falling at a slower rate. But that's something I've definitely noticed. And then I know I've talked to my buddy Ron about this before, but like 8-pound test versus 10 versus 12, there's also, we think about that when we're cranking, lighter line will allow your crankbait to get down a little bit deeper, but 12-pound test is more dense. It's got a little bit more weight than say 8-pound test. So you got to figure that into the play as well. It's a lot that goes into jerkbait fishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there definitely is.
I like the braided split ring though. I hadn't thought about that to lighten that up. They also make some like floats too, don't they? Like some they make some kind of floating strips now. I've seen that you can stick them on the back of a jerkbait to kind of
help it stay up a little bit. Yeah,
well, that's a pretty good idea.
And it helps keep the fish pinned a little bit too.
And make her really dive.
Bascon 1960 says, how long will you let your jerkbait sit after you cast it?
I mean, it really just depends. I mean, I'm looking at it all the time, so it really just depends on if I'm letting it sit there and sink, or, I mean, like last week, some of my casts, I would get it down to its max depth, and I'd be waiting for probably 30 seconds for it to sink, or I'd jerk it to the brush pile and let it sink for 20 or 30 seconds. Just depending on how far it needed to get down there. But I would say if it's around a fish, I never let it sit for very long. And like you said, I feel like more so than anything, like whenever you were just letting that jerkbait sit for 30 seconds at a time, not looking at it, it was a fish that was swimming to it, or maybe it was coming way up off the bottom. I don't think that it was just sitting there in front of that fish that long before they ate it. And that's the thing about a jerkbait is you got 3 hooks hanging where the fish are looking. And so I feel like a lot of times they can see that really well. And so, especially in cleaner water, obviously. And like our water clarity last week was like 5 foot. It was pretty clear. So it kind of just depends on how deep the fish are, but I never want them to be able to look at it for very long.
So are you sensitive about like a black hook versus a standard nickel type of hook? How much of a difference do you think that can make?
Well, it probably can make a lot of difference, especially if you're throwing like a black hook, on a white body. I mean, that obviously stands out more, but I always throw like the nano coated hooks, just because they stay super sharp and you just land a lot more fish on them, I think. And they're like that light gray color, so I think that probably helps it blend into a shad color a little bit more. Now, like if we're talking about red hooks or something, I never do stuff like that because that just doesn't look natural at all. But
yeah. Are those round bend or EWGs?
Round bend.
Round bend. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have the choice, you're going round bend over EWGs, or does it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the EWGs for jerk baits because you tend to have a lot of fish that'll slap at it, or they get it on the outside of their head. And so, that EWG is curved in just a hair. And so I feel like you're going to miss more of those fish with that. So that's why I like the true round bend. Now, if you're on like a good smallmouth bite, especially if you're up north or something and you're just ripping it really hard, I think that's a little bit different. But especially in the spring, because you'll have a lot of fish that just come up to it and they'll get right on there. They barely put their mouth on it. And so you need every little pinpoint that you can get there to be able to hook those fish sometimes.
Yeah. So what do you think about like putting scent on a bait when things are that critical?
I've never done that on a jerkbait. I mean, I obviously think scent matters whenever a bait's sitting there. Like if you're bed fishing, I throw a max in a ton. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it could make a difference on a jerkbait. I've never tried that before.
Yeah, I know, because I'm the same way. I always think about, around the spawn. Anytime you're dragging something on the bottom, I always think about putting some scent on it. But I was thinking about a jerkbait too. I mean, it's like you said, it's sitting there for 20 seconds.
Right, it's not a bad idea.
They're sniffing it for sure.
And if it did help you catch one extra fish a day, why would you not do it?
Right. I agree. I mean, doing what you're doing, that one fish can make a huge difference.
Yeah, especially whenever it's super tough to catch a limit.
Yeah. Stephanie wants to know, what size hooks do you use on your jerk baits?
So a lot of so typically a jerkbait always comes with a size 6. And a lot of the brands that make like those nano coated round bends they're a little bit smaller in comparison to most of those just nickel hooks. And so I throw a size 5, when I change those out on my jerkbait. And it's about the same weight. And I think that's the important part. That way you keep the same action and, have the same sink rate to it.
What's up, David? We had fun, man. We had a good time. It's all about having fun in the boat. Okay, so staying on the jerkbait topic for a little bit, and then we'll get kind of into practice for the tournament and stuff. How do you decide your rotation of jerkbaits? You mentioned, you got different jerkbaits that you will try based on the action. What are you seeing that would make you change, or how are you going to change from, one action to another? And we might as well just kind of go into colors too, like selecting certain colors versus certain conditions. Talk a little bit about that.
So, the action, like I don't know that you can really tell the way that fish are acting to it to know what action. I think you just have to change and kind of see. And I think I don't know if it's the action more than it is the sound or something else, because, if you're in a place like Lake of the Ozarks and everybody throws megabass jerkbaits, then I feel like they probably know that profile. They probably know that sound really well and the action. And so, sometimes maybe if you throw something that's a little bit different, then you'll get some extra fish to bite. So like last year, or let's see, this is 2 years ago now, at Grand Lake, we had a Toyota series. And for the first like day and a half or 2 days of practice, I threw a megabass exclusively. And I was catching like one fish a day. And then I finally switched to a stunner and started catching all kinds of fish, and then had a really good tournament just throwing the stunner. And so I don't know if that was just like an action deal, if it was a noise deal or what. So for me, I always have, if I know it's going to be a jerkbait bite, I always have at least 3 tied on. That way I can just kind of rotate through and, see what they end up biting a little bit better. And I always even test that throughout the tournament or whatever. I wouldn't say it's like I've definitely figured it out kind of deal, because you can go to different parts of the lake and it could be different, stuff like that. Color, I try to keep my color pretty simple in general. And I've heard over the years a lot of really good jerkbait fishermen say that if it's cloudy, throw an orange belly or a little bit of chartreuse belly, so I try to do that, or throw an all white jerkbait a lot. depending on your watercolor, and then cloud cover. But then, if it gets really clear, like 5 foot, like we had at Lake of the Ozarks or better, if we're on Table Rock or something like that. I like those clear shad colors. And so like Berkeley makes a Stunna that's Table Rock shad, and it kind of has that orange belly to it, but it's white with a little bit of chartreuse on the side. And so for that bait, I like to just take some sandpaper to the belly, and you can get to that. Yep, that's it right there. And that looks
I
more
was prepared.
chartreuse than it is, I think. But yeah, I'll just take some sandpaper to that belly and get rid of the orange that's on there. And then it also gets to that base of the bait, which is that clear,
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, I use that color 90% of the time. And it just depends if I'm using the worn out version of it or just the true color of it.
So you're taking a lot of that hard paint color off of there and make it a little more opaque.
Yeah, on the bottom. That's why I like to throw in the clear water. I just love that color in general, So
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's man, there's a lot to that. When you've got, this is just my thoughts on some of that stuff. That stuff that's real pretty and glossy, like a lot of your crankbaits. Obviously some of that's to catch the fisherman's eye on the shelves, I think. But I don't think that's that natural. I think, matting stuff out. You're talking about like the Berkeley Max Scent stuff. Some of their creature baits like that. I can't remember what's called, like the creature hog or power hog or something that they got. First time I saw those, I'm like, that's the ugliest looking color.
It looks like a 4-year-old poured it in.
Yeah, it's just dull and matted out, but it works, and that kind of you get some confidence in that kind of dull looking color, and then you start thinking, and you hear the old school dudes talking about taking sandpaper to a wiggle wart or whatever it is they're throwing and doling it down, and I mean, it makes sense to me.
Well, Gabe, what do you do to a tube as soon as you put a tube on? You want it all beat up and nasty.
Yeah,
you start really catching them.
Yeah, or anything that's got a lot of salt in it, like if you take a Cinco or a Ned bait or something, I like to really kind of pull on. Same thing with the tube. I like to pull on it and kind of expose that salt, and it gives it that kind of matte look. And then, we've all been catching fish really good on a soft plastic bait. We'll catch 3, 4, 5 fish on a bait, and then it just gets tore up, and we get a brand new fresh one out of the pack, and all of a sudden we may not catch them. Well, that bait, once it gets those teeth marks on it, it gets kind of roughed up and it loses that shine to it and becomes more natural. And that bait is like at its best right before it just tears up and you can't use it anymore most of the time. So that's something to think about. Here's a question from Curtis. He says, what's your take on snaps instead of split rings?
I'm assuming that's for the line tie.
Yeah, for the line tie.
I don't really like that just because it's something bigger. It's a little shiny. I mean, it just seems unnecessary to me versus doing just a split ring. Like I said, I don't like how long they are, and I feel like it probably weights the nose of your jerkbait a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. I noticed that a little bit. It depends on the jerkbait. I use a snap quite a bit.
I guess you could use a pretty small one, and it'd probably be about the same weight.
Yeah, if you actually take the split ring off and use a snap instead, it's a little bit better. But some of them, like a mega bass, I haven't been throwing a Vision 110 much lately. I've been throwing the Bill Lewis scope stick. I got a lot of confidence in that, and I was throwing a Vision 110 around the other day, and it really goes like this if you've got just a little bit of weight on the nose of that thing. And back to what you said about the sound, there's a huge difference. I got used to the sound of that scope stick, and then when I picked up the Vision 110, it's got that kind of thud sound. It's a lower thud to it. So there's definitely, that's another thing to think about, is just the sound profile of each jerkbait, not just the action, but the sound profile. See if we got any more questions in here. Okay, we'll start getting into the tournament a little bit. Fishing Guide says, what part of the lake did you fish? What exactly did you look for in practice and breakdown of the lake?
So for me, I always go down from the glaze in the wintertime. Just seems to always be the best section of the lake in general. And I would say, if in general terms, if you're looking at like the 20-mile marker to the dam, is probably your best, general section of the lake. And I fished within a couple miles of the gravel either way. And what did I look for? So I was kind of, whenever I figured it out in practice, I was really finding fish because they were grouped up so well on secondary points, or if like a creek had a big flat bank, or a big round flat point, something like that. There would be fish on almost all those, but you could go, through a whole pocket or a lot of a creek and never see a fish, but then you'd get to a little secondary and there'd be, fish all over it. And so, I was just running a lot of water looking at those points. And I think, especially on Lake Ozarks, there's a ton of fish in the lake. So you could, tell yourself, well, there's fish everywhere. I'm just going to keep going and maybe I'll run across one. But I think a good way to approach it is figure out the best pattern within the lake. Because, like I said, there's fish everywhere in Lake Ozarks. So I feel like you could waste a lot of time not fishing for the most amount of fish. If you know what I'm saying, because there was like I said, 10 to maybe 50. I think I had a bass or a point that had 50 bass on it.
Wow.
And it was really hard to get them to bite whenever they're grouped up like that. But in general, it was the flatter stuff. So I'd kind of be off the bank a little ways, fishing 12 to 18 foot of water. So it was just covering water and find as many piles as I could that had fish in them, and it wasn't hard to spot one.
Yeah. So you're in practice, you're idling around. I mean, how did you break that down? I know you got a lot of history on the lake. You're pretty familiar with it, but if somebody was to, just go to Lake of the Ozarks this time of year and try to figure out, how to find a fish, what would you recommend that they do?
Well, like I said, I would start looking at those flat secondary points, and literally anywhere from right on the main lake to the very back of a creek. I kind of found fish on all that stuff. And I don't have a lot of really good wintertime stuff there. I've spent more time, later in the spring or in the fall. And so, like for me, I caught most of the fish in the tournament that I found that day. I just found a couple fish in practice, and it kind of just led me on to the pattern to find these fish. And so, I think that if you did that, and kept just hitting those points, trying to be efficient with your time, that you're definitely going to find fish. Now, it's not going to be easy to get them to bite, probably. Like if I caught a fish or two off of a point or a brush pile, it was really hard to catch another one. And so there was a couple spots where I caught one the first day and came back the third day and caught some fish. But in general, if I try to come back in the same day, I couldn't. It was really hard to get one to bite. So I just run new water. And, like I said, there's so many fish on that lake that it's not really hard to find a little group of them.
Why don't you think the jig head minnow played?
Well, because not enough people threw it, honestly. So there was a lot of crappie, in these same areas. And honestly, I'd see bass sitting underneath the crappie. And I hear guys all the time, like crappie fishermen this time of year, they catch like 4 or 5 pounders while they're crappie fishing. So I think it's just something that people don't do. Not that they don't bite it. Like Drew stayed at my house this week, and first day of the tournament, he only had one fish, but he was throwing a rig and a jerkbait and throwing a minnow a little bit. But then days 2 and 3, he really, dedicated his days to those throwing a minnow, and he caught 2 really great bags. I mean, he caught 12 something and then 14 something 2 days in a row throwing a minnow. So I just don't think enough people did it. I think there was a lot of guys that dedicated their week to an A rig, and they suffered with not enough bites, but they got big ones. And then everyone else kind of stuck maybe to a jerk bait. And then, I mean, I hear guys all the time say that they don't bite a minnow on Lake of the Ozarks, but I just don't think they throw it enough.
Yeah, I think they bite a minnow anywhere.
I mean, I
they
think
use
I
minnows.
think I think one of the biggest things too, the problems with people saying that is they throw an A rig at them, and then they throw a jerk bait, and then they throw the minnow. So those fish have already seen several different baits, and those fish have been drug out of the pile a couple times. And so it's not that they won't bite it; it's that they didn't make the first cast in there with it. Because your first cast at a fish or in a pile is the most important one. That's whenever you're going to get those fish to bite 90% of the time. So, you know, I think if you did dedicate your time to throwing that first to the fish, that it would be, you know, a really solid way to catch them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. They get smart pretty quick. How do you think the reason why do you think it was so tough down there? I mean, is it strictly the shad kill, do you think? I mean, combined with the
I
cold
think it was,
temperatures?
yeah, I think it was a combination of the water temperature and the shad kill. Because, I mean, the shad kill was huge. You know, they were
Yeah.
floating everywhere. And then also, I think another factor, which has been tough all winter, but whenever the fish get grouped up like they do, and I mean, a lot of the guys that you talk to from the tournament found a lot of fish, they just couldn't catch them. And I think that was another problem, is that there'd be so many fish on a spot that you make one cast in there and you educated 20 or 30 fish, and so maybe some of these guys were running the same spots as other people. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I wanted to run, I never even got to fish because there would be boats on it, in the tournament. So I think probably a little bit of pressure, and then obviously being so cold and that shad kill. I mean, it's always hard to catch fish during a shad kill.
Yeah, it's crazy that lake's like however many thousands of acres there are, and it can fish pretty small too.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, man. My neighbor in my old house, he was a crappie fisherman. He tied hair jigs, and he'd go over to these local lakes and just he had like a 12-foot rod. He'd have a little section of braid, and he'd have his little cricket tied on there, and he'd just dab around in the holes in the grass, and he'd catch a 4 or 5 pounder or a couple almost every time he'd go. In the middle of the summer when the bite is really, really tough, and he's catching them with a little bitty baby crappie jig.
Right. Did you hear about the 5-pounder that I caught on the float and fly?
Yes, I was wanting to get into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your experience with the float and fly? Where did that come from? That's like such a random
Well,
thing
I mean, I went to college in Springfield, and so we were like 45 minutes from Table Rock, and so for 6 years, that's like the only place that I fished. And so obviously that can be a big player down there. So I really learned how to do it and catch a lot of fish on it. And it's not always effective everywhere. But I mean, I think that this week was just kind of perfect for it to work at Lake Ozarks. So
talk us through that setup, because I actually tried that a long, long time ago. I remember I watched I don't know if it was a video or read an article about it, but it was somebody down in like Dale Hollow or somewhere in Tennessee, and they were talking about that float and fry.
It's really big on Dale Hollow, yeah.
Yeah, and I tried it a little bit, but I mean, I only tried it for like a couple hours. I didn't really try it. But
yeah,
what's that? How do you fish a float and fly, or what's the setup like and all that?
So this is kind of crazy. I learned how to do it in college on Table Rock, and then I hooked and lost probably the biggest bass that I've ever seen on Table Rock on that float and fly. And so I've always kept it around or thrown in at pressured fish. But what I do is I throw a little 1/8 ounce, I mean, exactly what a crappie head would look like, but Picasso makes a really good head that actually has like a decent hook in it, not because you don't want a crappie hook, obviously, that'll bend out. But so that has a pretty strong hook in it. And then I just tie my own, and I'll put, like 2 feathers in there and a little bit of bucktail. And I mean, it's only like 2.5 inches at most. It's probably 2 inches. It's pretty small. And I'll tie a loop knot to that. And then you have to buy the slip bobbers, and I get the long ones to where they're going to be on their side whenever it's sinking, and then they turn up right whenever they, and then that way you can actually see when it's got down there. And then sometimes if the fish eat it and come up with it, it'll turn on its side, so that way you can kind of see that too. And so you have this little tie. So you put that on your line, you pull it tight, and then you can adjust that up and down your line, based on the depth you want to fish. So like this past week, whenever I was throwing it, I was adjusting it based on each pile because I'd want it, just right over the top of it, as close to those fish as possible. So it's good to be able to move it like that.
So when you're talking about so grew up crappie fishing, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Are you using the thread stopper, or are you actually using the plastic stopper?
The thread stopper. That way I can put it in my reel, if it's deeper than 10 foot or whatever.
Well, that was my question, was how deep are you going?
Or
what was the probably deepest you saw in these piles this weekend?
It was probably 12 to 14.
Wow.
Maybe 10 to 12. Because like I said, the water I was fishing was, 12 to 18 most of the time. So I wanted it kind of right over the top of those piles. So, that thread would be in my reel a little bit, but you can cast with it just fine.
Right. No different than throwing a knot out. I'm assuming you're looking at that on Ford Facebook.
Yeah. I think you got to be looking at it.
So it's so different than crappie fishing over a pile when you're vertical over the top of one, or you're pushing a jig with a 14-foot rod.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So like I think I weighed 3 fish on it the last day, and 2 of them were pretty small, but I had this one brush pile that was in a flat pocket. And the day before, so day 2 of the tournament, I threw a jerkbait over this pile, and 2 big ones came out chasing my jerkbait pretty hard. And then there was one that just flew out of the pile from behind him and ate it, and it was a 4-pounder. And so I fished through there, and I came back on day 3. And so I get up to this pile and I see it, and there's 4 big ones sitting there. So there's one that's sitting like on a limb up high, and then there's 3 big ones in the bottom. So I throw my jerkbait over the pile, and that big one on top comes straight up and eats it. And I pull into her, and I have her for a couple seconds, and it just pops off.
Oh.
So that sucks. I thought that pile was done for. So I got the float and fly because those 3 big ones at the bottom are still there. So, I mean, it was pretty windy. So it took me like 10 casts to get it right with my depth and getting it right on line and everything. But finally, I got one time where it went right over the pile, and the 2 biggest ones came up at it. And, one was right on it and the other one was trailing. And so whenever I have that fly, obviously it just sits there. But it's kind of like you would be fishing a jig head minnow, where if they start to come at it, you kind of want to reel it away from them a little bit, like a shad would. So, your bobber's still sitting there floating, but I'm kind of reeling it, watch on live scope, just kind of reeling it up away from them. And so I'm sitting there doing that, reeling it away from this first one, and she gets right on it and never eats it. So she kind of like goes down, and then that second one kind of comes up, and she just swims right up to it, and I see her eat it, and then she noses down. And the problem with the float and fly is that you don't feel the bite. I mean, you have so much slack between your rod and the bobber and the fish that you don't really feel it. I mean, you do sometimes if they hit it hard, but so I just was kind of reeling until it got tight and pulled into her. But my coach said that my bobber was down for like 5 seconds before I actually pulled into it.
You were never looking
and then it was a 5-pounder.
You probably never looked at your bobber though, right?
No. I mean, I want to be watching that fish, just in case that she didn't eat it and I couldn't tell, and then she comes back up.
Mm-hmm.
I still want to be able to reel it away from her. I don't want it to just sit there and her fly up and then stop. So I think you might want to take a look at your bobber every now and then, though, because I probably could have got her a little sooner.
Did she have it choked, I'm assuming?
No, she didn't. I mean, the hook was, I don't know, maybe an inch inside her mouth.
Oh.
So she just came up and just nipped it. She didn't inhale it or anything.
What are you throwing? Like what size line? 8?
I throw usually 8 or 10.
Okay.
And honestly, I just had 10 on my rod this week, so that's what I threw with it.
That's
So,
pretty
and then,
awesome, man.
yeah, I like to throw it on a little bit longer rod. The 7.4 medium light is what I was throwing this week. So you want something that's got a lot of flex to it. Just being such a small hook, that sometimes you just kind of skin hook them. So I think it's really good if you have, a lot of action to fight them.
So with that wind, your bobber or your fly's doing this anyway, right? I mean, it's
right. Yeah.
I mean, you can't keep it still, but like if it was dead slick calm, would you just let it hover, or would you try to put any action in it most of the time?
Well, if I'm never gonna let it just sit there if there's a fish on it or following it.
Yeah, you're gonna pull
The
it
only
away.
reason I'm letting it sit there is so that they'll actually come up out of the pile to it. And then once they start to get kind of close, I'll start to reel it or, slowly twitch it away from them. You should try to give it some action.
That's so crazy that with all the shad that are like dying and disoriented, that you can get a 5-pounder to come up out of a pile and eat a little like 2.5
it's
inch
crazy,
piece
dude.
of hair on a
I did
jig.
not think I'd be catching them on that this week at all.
It's insane.
How many times in a year outside of that situation, super cold water, post shad kill, are you going to use that technique?
Oh, hardly ever.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's more of a wintertime thing than anything.
Like dead of winter, super cold. Super
pretty much. Yeah, and that's why you throw it with bobber so you can move it slower.
Right.
If not, I mean, I still throw that little hair jig by itself. And so the biggest thing, and like with these fish this week, they were just moving so slow that you had to let it sit there. I never would have been able to catch that big one if I was just throwing the hair jig without the bobber.
Yeah.
Because I would have reeled it, I would have reeled it up before she ever got to it. So
yeah, it's just keeping it in that strike zone for a very, very, very long time.
Right. So it's just whenever the fish are moving slow. So really, I never throw outside of the winter. Now, I would say maybe the exception, like we're going to Smith Lake this year, I guess in April, and places like that. Whenever your goal is to catch like 2.5 pound spotted bass and it's really pressured, I could throw at places or situations like that. But otherwise, it's got to be pretty cold for me to break that out.
At least with the slip bobber too, that it doesn't look like you're throwing a bobber and a little bait underneath it.
Right.
Just looks like a jerkbait or a
yeah.
A plug going out there until it hits the water and it's still floating on top. So
it's kind of sneaky.
It is.
I mean, it just looks like you're crappie fishing. I mean, obviously you're in it.
Honestly, I'm not real worried about talking about it or telling people that I won the tournament using that, because I know that nobody's going to use it, or people are going to get frustrated and do it 2 or 3 casts and say, "Oh, this is stupid," and then never throw it again. So I've talked to a lot of guys that that's the case with them. They said they've tried it and didn't work for them, and they don't do it anymore. So.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, it's going to be a very specific deal. It's
right.
Something you got to know when to, you don't probably go out on the lake looking for a floating fly bite most of the time. I wouldn't think. You're doing something else and it kind of presents itself.
Those aren't even your ideal conditions to go fishing either. Like,
right.
If it's that bad, like, I hate to say that there's better things to do, but sometimes there's better things to do if it's that bad.
Well, you look at the stats from that tournament. It's kind of mind blowing. I mean, on the co side, it was like, I think there was 121, 122 co's, and day one, I think 99 zeroed, and then day two, I want to say like 97 of them zeroed. That's unbelievable. And then on the boater side, there was a ton of really good fishermen.
It was like 30+% of the boaters double blanked.
Yeah, that's crazy. And a lot of those guys are looking at them, just like you said, Cole. They're seeing fish. They just can't get them to bite. I mean, It's one thing when you're in the back of the boat and you're blindly casting and, good luck. But if you're actually looking at them and you still can't get them to bite, it just shows you how negative the fish were. They were they were in a really, really foul mood, and it was just brutal.
Right. And, I think a lot of guys that said that the fish weren't biting, it's because they were going back to the same fish. I feel like that might have been a big problem too. Because, like, a lot of the fish that I ended up weighing in were under ice even the last day of practice. And it was stuff that I was running to go look at, and then it was iced over, and then I was like, oh, I guess I'll come back in the tournament and just see. And we had a lot of wind the last day of practice, so I think that broke a lot of it up too. But I think that was kind of important, is running fresh fish that hadn't been messed with for a week, because your bite percentage would go up a little bit. Even still, with me finding fish, I thought I was going to catch one or two a couple of the days. I mean, day 2, I only had like one fish at 10:30, and I was like, there's no way I can catch 4 in the last couple hours,
Yeah.
So.
But it wasn't for lack of seeing fish, I'm assuming, correct? You were seeing
not lack of seeing fish at all. No, it was just getting them to bite. I mean, it was just impossible.
And you could throw, I mean, you had forward-facing sonar, you could throw A-rigs, like you had all the tools in your bag, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And just so what you're telling me, Cole, is they don't just jump in the boat when you throw an A-rig and you.
That would be correct. That would be correct.
Oh,
yeah.
Goodness.
Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the water temperatures were like 36 to 38, 39 most of the time.
Yeah, tournament started, it was like 36, 37 in the afternoon. Then by the end of the tournament, day 3, I saw like 40.
That's still super cold water.
Oh, yeah. Very cold.
Yeah. Well, like you're saying, I mean, some of that had ice on it the day before.
Yeah.
Or 2 days before.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. Huh. Well, congratulations, man. That was a very hard fought battle.
Well,
did you feel like you I mean, I guess other than Andy Newcomb bringing in almost 21-pound bag, which that was a shocker. I'm like, where the heck did that come from?
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, he almost caught you. I mean,
he did. He was really close.
Yeah. Did you so what were you feeling when you were in the bag line? I mean, did you feel like you had it wrapped up, or were you not sure?
Well, like coming into that
tight.
day,
Weights were tight,
Yeah, they were pretty tight. Like, coming into that day, I thought if I had 12 pounds, I'd have a chance, and if I caught like 15, it'd be done. And so I had 13, so I was like, that's pretty solid. Like, there's a good chance. And so as soon as I got to the dock, I had to walk around to everybody and like see what everybody had. I had to know. It was killing me. It was killing me the whole ride back and everything. And so I went to Adam first, and he only had 2, and I was like, holy crap. And Justin Lukemeyer only had like 2 fish too, and I mean everybody else was back at least a couple pounds at that point. And so I mean, and there's the guy that comes to the live wells, checks for fish dead or alive, and I took a look at his list, and everyone had between 1 and 3 fish except for Andy. And so I went to Andy and I did the math before I went to him. I was like, okay, he needs like 22 pounds to beat me. And so, and I hear everyone say that he always underestimates his bags. So that's not a good fact either. But he said he had 20. And I was like, do you think there's a chance you have 22? And he's like, no, definitely not. And then I told that someone that was like, he's always a pound or 2 light. And so I was just stressing the whole time until he weighed in. Because he had the 7.5 pounder on top of his bag, and his bag looked huge. I thought it could definitely go 22. So he's the only guy that had me stressing.
So, I mean, it was right there.
Yeah, that was nuts. So after he weighed in, I was pretty relieved.
Jeez. Yeah, and then Jordan Hurt, the guy that had 18.5 day 1. I think he only had 2 fish the second day.
Right.
And God, it just shows you how it's a harder. You were you one of the only folks to have like 5 fish limit all 3 days?
I was the only one to have 5 fish limit all 3 days, and there was only one other guy that had a limit the first 2 days, which was Kyle Kitts.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been a part of a tournament that only 2 guys caught limits the first 2 days.
You said Drew stayed with you, right?
Yeah.
So when's the last time that the guy that took 10th place caught one fish for 2.5 pounds on day one.
I have no idea.
And then you're taking 10th in a tournament, right? Like
probably never. Yeah, and then it ends up 10th. Yeah, that's crazy.
That right there is very telling of how tough it was when Drew comes in with one.
Right. Yeah.
That's,
it's tough if that happens for sure.
Yeah. Scoper extraordinaire.
Yeah, and he works hard too. It's not like he's just out there fun fishing.
Exactly. No, he covers a ton of water, and he throws at a lot of fish in a day.
Mm-hmm. How did your co-anglers do?
So the first day he zeroed. The second day, it was real windy, and so I was like spot locked in this pocket, and there was kind of brush all around. And he threw a Ned rig to one of the points and caught a 3.5 pounder. And it was a brush pile that was just loaded with good ones, but I couldn't catch one after that. And then on day 3, I had Dan Bowman. He's a great Lake of the Ozarks fisherman, and he had 2 keepers. But he only ended up weighing 1 because he was scared that they would count him off for the 1. It was a line burner, so he ended up getting second. He might have won with that second fish, but he caught fish all week.
I think I didn't realize out there for a courtesy bump.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah, that's a tough call, man. I mean,
I would have waited. 100%.
I would have waited 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like they're usually their board's a little bit short, I guess. Seems like their weights are a little bit heavy and their board's just slightly short. Huh. Well, that's cool, man. I'd heard like the Ned rig and the jig was about the only way you can get a bite out of the back of the boat. I heard several people say they called them on Ned rigs as a co-angler.
Mm-hmm.
Super slow. Yeah, I was watching that weigh-in, and the co-angler that won, he didn't even have to weigh in a fish the third day.
Right.
He just sat up there on stage.
Because he caught a bag the second day.
Yeah, somebody else knows that feeling, don't they, Gabe?
Yeah. It happens occasionally.
Wasn't that how you won the?
No, I had to catch a 6 pound. The first fish of that regional in Pickwick, I had my first bass, and I didn't weigh it, but I did the math, and it had to be over 6 pound largemouth, and I only needed like 5.4 to win. So that first fish, won it for me. And of course, you don't realize that, but I ended up having 14 pounds and 3 fish. So yeah, it wasn't even close, but
that's crazy.
Yeah, you never know, man. You never know. It's like there's been so many times where you jump off a fish and then you end up, missing a check or there's been several tournaments where, you lose by 1 pound and you saw the fish come off. You're like, God, you don't realize it if it happens early in the day. It's 9 o'clock. You've been fishing for a couple of hours. You jump one off. You're like, that sucks, but I got 6 more hours to go. I can make it up. And then it never happens. or you're that one that jumped off was a 4 pounder and you got, just a line burner in the live well, and you weigh in and you're, 1.2 pounds from winning the dang tournament. And it's hard to get in that position.
We were looking at this weekend, I guess it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Thursday evening, we were looking at the results and sitting around here in the house. It's like, how many times fishing as a co-angler did you came in? It's like, man, I wonder if everybody just sucked as bad as I did today. And you were the one of 3 blanks for the day. So no, you're the one that just sucked today. Mm-hmm. But this one, you come in and it's like, I caught one little squeaker and holy cow, I'm in the top 30.
Yeah.
200 boats.
Top 20 almost the first day.
Yeah. Well, the significance of a 12 1/4 inch spot for anybody in that tournament, boater or non-boater, was huge. I mean, you think if somebody's fishing the Toyota Series for points and you're a boater or a co-angler, and you zero, there's no points to gain. But if you weigh in a 12 1/4 inch spot, you kind of salvage the tournament in a weird way. I mean, you live to fight another day.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I had 2 spotted bass that were under 15 inches that I weighed on the final day, and I only won by a pound 12 ounces. So, even though those fish were small, those were very necessary fish.
Wow.
Those 2 fish were your winning fish. Like,
yeah.
Huh.
Which is crazy to think about, because you catch it and you boat flip it, you're like, oh, whatever, it's just a little one.
Yeah, that one hits the gunnel and falls over. You're like, whatever.
Right.
Well, it's like, do you need the net? No, I'll just swing it, and it turns out to be a pivotal fish. What do you think is going to be the cut weight on Kentucky Lake, and then what do you think the winning weight's going to be?
Cut weight as in a check or a top 10?
Let's do check, and then to fish the third day.
Originally, I was thinking like 14 pounds a day.
Okay.
But after hearing from everybody, to get a check, but after hearing from everybody and actually being out there, I'm going to say it's going to be more like, I don't know, closer to 13 probably. And then for a top 10, I don't know. It's really hard to say. I wanted to say 17 before, but honestly, that's closer to whenever it's pretty good or solid. I wouldn't say pretty good, but so maybe 16 something a day, low 16s maybe will make the top 10. Even though it's tough, I feel like that the fish right now are probably grouped up because they're more in their wintertime pattern or closer to it. Plus with the water level being, pretty low. So I feel like there's going to be some guys that just get on whatever it is this week or find some schools or, how it goes. So I think it'll be a top heavy fall quick kind of tournament.
Yeah, right.
For sure. And so, maybe even lower on the check weight. I'm not sure, but also looks like we're going to have pretty high winds on day 2. There's 35-mile-an-hour gusts out of the south. So that's going to be a questionable day for sure.
Yeah, you might.
I would imagine if that's the case, they'll probably cancel that day.
I'm thinking so. I mean, 35 out of the south. That's
on Kentucky Lake.
Yeah, exactly.
With current, it's it's not ripping, but it's flowing pretty good.
It's enough to make it rough for sure.
Yes,
it's over 100 right now. I just looked at it a while ago. So
yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. So you think 21 a day will win it?
I don't think it'll take that much. No.
Okay.
I think it'll take 19 something a day. Unless there's one guy that surprises you, but on average, I'm going to say 19 and a half a day. Just because if you go back and look, I mean, we had that Toyota that was last March, and, it was right at 20 pounds a day. And that was Mr. Kentucky Lake, and like fishing was pretty good. So I'm going to say closer to 19 than 20 for sure.
Who's Mr. Kentucky Lake?
Lawrence?
Jake Lawrence.
Jake? Yeah. Okay. I was just making sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the new Mr. Kentucky Lake.
Right. Yeah. The new Mr. Kentucky Lake. The recent Kentucky Lake.
Man, it's tough down there. There's some guys sniffing all around too, though. You got a lot of those hammers down there. They just keep popping up. It's crazy. You got a rough job, Cole. You got a rough job.
Yeah,
There's always
somebody
nipping at your heels.
Yeah.
So somebody said,
I caught some good ones. I caught some good fish yesterday, but I just wasn't really getting that many bites. So it's hard to say. I caught like a 412 smallmouth and a 4.5 pound largemouth and another just under 4 pound smallmouth, but I was not catching a ton of fish.
Yeah, but you're not trying to catch a ton of fish, probably.
No, I was covering water, catch one fish, go look at something else, but everything that I saw, they weren't like grouped up by any means. It was like one random fish here, one random fish there. And yeah, it's something like patternable, I would say, but it still makes me nervous that I would even catch a limit doing it. So I don't know. For me, it's kind of be a toss up whether it's any good or not.
Yeah. Do you like the ideal that the Opens eliminated co-anglers for 2025, or what's your thoughts on co-anglers versus not? Yeah.
Well, it's not that I don't mind having co-anglers in the boat, but I think just sometimes it messes with me mentally whenever they're catching fish and I'm not, which seems to happen. It seemed to happen more when I started, doing BFLs and Toyotas than it does now. But, like, I feel like it really, like, throws me off. Like, last week, whenever I had that one day where I had one fish at 10:30 and then my co catches a 3.5 pounder. And then I'm like, gosh dang it, what am I doing wrong? He's got me tying on a Ned rig. I'm like, you know what I'm saying? It gets me out of my mental zone trying to figure out what the heck I need to do.
Spinning you out.
Yeah. So that's the only problem that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, I always think of, that's a fish that you could have maybe caught, but you're not throwing a Ned rig. So,
I mean, that fish, it was behind me. Like, I wasn't going to catch that fish.
Right.
But I did sit down and tie on a Ned rig.
So
I might have wasted some time throwing it.
In the Toyota, does every boater have a co?
Yes.
So it was full across the board?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. To fish the tournament, you have to have even number of co's and pros. So
see, and that was the difference in the opens, right? Like there would be 220 boats and then 50 co's.
Right. And I think that's probably why we see tournaments like last week, which I know a lot of guys dropped out because it was so tough, but there was only 121 boats. And I think that's just because, people sometimes have a hard time, getting a co to fish, or sometimes there's more co's or more boaters on the wait list and they can't find, the other one to do it. So, and I think some people probably don't sign up for a tournament if they can't find a link or whatever. So if they could figure out a way to do it to have more boats, I think there might be a better way to do it. But I think this keeps everybody honest for sure.
So they don't go boat on boat draw like they do in the BFLs.
They don't do that anymore.
They don't do that in the Toyotas, no. And you can get, like, if you're a boater and you're there and there's no co-anglers for you, then you can get a spectator to sit in your boat that doesn't fish.
Okay.
So that's nice that you have that option, at least if you can find somebody to do that.
Is that on you as a boater to provide a spectator for like day 2 then?
Yeah, you can find one, or sometimes they send out text messages to a bunch of people to try to get it filled. So I think they just do it however they can.
Well, most of the time it's in a town that's a college is close by, and you can get a couple college anglers that may not have boats to go ride around for a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Robertson's going to win it.
I bet he does. If I had put money on it,
he's good in the current. It's setting up perfect for him, for sure.
Yeah, he's a killer.
Here's a question from Stephanie. She says, why does it throw you off? You have the advantage with forward-facing sonar.
I think it for me, it doesn't throw it. It would throw me off if I didn't have forward-facing sonar, or if I had forward-facing sonar. Just somebody else catching something's changing my mindset.
Yep.
Well, what I mean by that is, like, I was trying to be efficient with my time, cover water, fish as many piles as I could, and then he caught a really good fish on a Ned rig, and so I'm sitting down, tying on a Ned rig, and I'm throwing it at fish for the next hour, not getting a bite, whenever I maybe could have gotten bites if I stuck with my jerkbait pattern. Or, like, we were fishing Pickwick in the Toyota Series Championship a couple years ago, and I'm going down the bank, and this dude is dragging a buzzbait behind the boat. And, his buzzbait's got to be over 20 foot of water. And he hooks like a 7-pounder, and it comes off right at the boat. So what do? I turn around and I go back down that stretch, like looking around for more fish, trying to figure out where that 7-pounder came from. And I did nothing but waste probably an hour looking at no fish. You know what I'm saying? So it just time efficiency for me is why it throws me off.
Yeah. I get it.
You and I fished enough. We fished enough BFLs out of the back of a boat where, you're running down the gauntlet of chase. This is with pre-forward facing sonar, chasing your fish down or trying to figure out something, and all of a sudden you get on a little something, and then you look up there and the boater's got the same thing tied on, and now you either work together or you're working against each other, and now what you had first shot at because you were throwing something completely different, now they got first shot at. So It's
Yeah, you
definitely
used to get
a couple times. So
in that scenario, you know, I've been there a couple times where I've found a little something in practice that I got a lot of confidence in, and it got tough on the boater, and then you crack a couple behind them, and you might be trying to keep it a little bit secretive, because as soon as he figures it out, it's going away for you, because you're not getting the first cast with that bait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's as simple as a color, a bait. You know, it doesn't. I mean, I remember one on the lake. It was just a different color crankbait, and man,
or June bug, or green pumpkin. Sometimes
yeah,
just going from one to the other can make that happens at Lake of the Ozarks a lot. Like, you'll be throwing green pumpkin, something plastic, not get bit, and then you put something June bug on. It's like it's like flipping a switch. They just wanted that darker color for whatever reason, and vice versa. Can be a big game
but
changer.
definitely, I think to the whole point of that little conversation, it can definitely spin you out in any sense if you're front, back, forward facing, no forward facing.
Yeah, 100%.
So. Well, and I think the main thing as far as the opens goes is you guys are trying to qualify for the next level, and a co-angler can play a big role in you know, especially a multiple day tournament where like let's say if the opens was on Lake of the Ozarks in the same scenario. You just mentioned how so many people were rotating through the same spots. That just shows how precious each fish is in each area. And if you've got, you know, 2 people in a boat fishing versus 1 person in a boat, you know, those fish are seeing that many more baits. And then there's a chance that, although this tournament, there wasn't many people catching fish and removing them, but if they were biting a little bit better, the guy in the back of the boat is removing a few fish from those key areas. And, you know, it can hurt the guys that are trying to qualify for the elite series. So I think that's probably the most important part of it, as far as, you know, I see it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. One more question from Stephanie. Do you let your coast fish on the other side of the boat if you're between 2 banks? One you're not fishing? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're going down a pocket and there's 2 sides and you're fishing one side and, you know, letting them cast the other that you haven't gone down yet is what I'm assuming. But I never tell a co where to cast or not cast. I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter if they're fishing towards. I don't want them like throwing over my line, obviously, but I don't ever say anything about it. I'm not too worried about stuff like that. And I'm so focused on what I'm trying to do, and you know, because for me, I try to be so as efficient as I can throughout the day. So I'm focused. I'm trying to see as many fish as possible, get my bait in front of as many as possible. So, you know, if they're throwing to the bank, I'm not probably going to be throwing to the bank, or if I am, I'm probably going to be moving quick down it. So I'm not too concerned about that.
Yeah.
Well, your style of fishing, Cole, I would imagine you're not seeing too much bank time.
Not a lot. Not unless I need to.
Yeah, I know fishing docks can be like, you know, like if they're, we've talked about this in the past on the live stream, but if you're you know, fishing docks and you're going, so you're in the back of the pocket and you're working your way out, there's always that next dock that you haven't cast to. So I know some boaters, they'd appreciate it if the co-angler didn't cast to those next docks, because they're naturally working that way, and it's part of their program, their plan. You ever had any co-anglers do anything crazy?
Not really, no. I mean, I've heard stories, but I mean, all the ones I've had have been pretty good, so I guess I'm just lucky so far.
Yeah, that's good. Which you got some experience on Grand, though, so that's where the Toyota Championship's at, right?
Yeah, and luckily I just qualified, so I don't have to worry about the points anymore.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it's very nice. I'm excited about that.
What time of the year is that Toyota Championship?
I think it's first week in November.
Okay.
So, I mean, you know, my consistency has kind of came March and April, so obviously it's going to be a lot different. I don't know. I don't even know what it's going to be like. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Who knows, man? It's so far away. It's like if it's more than 3 days away, you don't really know what's going to happen.
Right. And I mean, if the water level's 2 foot different, it could be a whole different tournament.
Yeah.
So
what do you have as far as your forward facing sonar setup? Like what's your graph setup and batteries and that kind of deal?
So I have 2 Lowrances, one on the front, one on the back, and that's for mapping waypoints. And then I got a Garmin on the front and the back, and I just have the one transducer. I have an EcoMap 12 for both of them, and I mean I know a lot of guys have 2 transducers or 3 or whatever, which we can only have one in the opens anyway. But for me, I just feel like I'm more efficient if I'm just focused and not, because I feel like I would go hours and like forget that I had that other screen to look at. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
and like whenever people talk about bed fishing and stuff and putting it in perspective, I mean, I see those fish on the forward mode, and I can throw it right to them. I don't have to guess where it is on perspective. I can see how that fish reacts to it. So I always keep it in forward. The only time that I would ever really change the perspective mode on there is if I've been in Florida and those fish have like been laying on the bottom and you can't see them on forward. So times like that, I might change it. Or if you're somewhere that doesn't have a hard bottom and they're on beds. So another example would be Florida. Or if you're somewhere in the grass. But besides that, I'm always using forward because I like to see exactly where stuff is at.
Yeah. That's cool. I thought you were going to say you had. Have you used Active Target? I thought you were going to say you had Active Target because
No, just the Garmin. I've seen it a couple times. I don't know that I've seen the newest one. But I mean, it was pretty good. It sees distance really well. I just don't think it has quite the same detail.
it's weird. It's got that delay.
Yeah, I don't like that about it.
Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, I guess you get used to it.
That was hard to get used to when you went from Garmin to Lowrance for me.
Yeah, because I got Garmin on my boat, but I've recently fished with the Active Target too, and it's really strange. Especially like a jerkbait. You hit it, and then the jerkbait moves, and then you hit it,
Right.
and the jerkbait moves.
Yeah,
You just got to get used to it. It's just a little bit behind. Everything's a little bit behind. So
well, I think the problem with that is sometimes you have fish that just freaking fly up out of somewhere, and then
yeah,
if you don't react to it right away and start reeling it away from them, they'll like put the brakes on and they won't eat it. So I think you need to see that, and as close to real time as possible.
yeah. That's what I was getting ready to say. It's like I remember fishing with last year. I was fishing a BFL and I was fishing with Travis Harriman. I pre-fished with him a couple days, and he's got an Active Target too. We're shaking the minnow at those spotted bass over deep water, and I was missing them because they already had my bait, and it didn't look like they had my bait on the ground.
Right.
And I was missing them. Where he was completely anticipating, based on how fast they were coming in and how they were responding. But coming from Garmin, I'm used to like real time, and when I see them hit it, my rod loads up slightly. Where I was still kind of giving it too much slack because I didn't see the fish hadn't actually like combined with my bait on the screen. And it took me a little bit. I mean, I never really got used to it, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I caught a few fish, but I missed a few fish where he didn't. He was dialed in on it because he's been fishing with it for a while. But it was kind of strange. It's just, it's just whatever you get used to, I guess.
Hey, Mike's got a good question there.
He just updated the LVS 34, had the 32 for several years. Did you see a big difference in the two?
Yeah, there's a huge difference. Like the first time that I saw the 34, I was looking at brush piles with fish in them or schools of fish, like 130 feet out that looked like they were 60 feet out on the 32. So, I mean, I was like, wow, that's crazy just how much farther you can see clarity. And I think, that cone angle might be a little bit wider. And so you take in more information. And so, you can see stuff a little bit better at distance. But at the same time, you can see a fish and throw to it and miss it a little bit, and you still see it on your screen. So you kind of got to get used to that and learn how to lead the fish, especially if they're moving, be able to see which way they're going and hit them go in that direction. So that's kind of how I deal with that.
Well, that is one positive, I would say, of the active target 2 is, that 18-degree cone. It makes you a little bit more accurate because you got to get it in the cone. It's not as forgiving as like a live scope. When you see your bait, you're going to be a lot closer to the fish. If you see your bait and the fish, you're going to be a lot closer.
You're going to be right on it.
Than with live scope. You can still see your bait and your fish, but be off to the side or whatever a little bit. Yeah, I still got the 32, but I got a new boat coming at the end of this month, and I'll have the 34. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. What color palettes are you running on that?
I use the blue color palette. So the background's blue, and then what I love about it is that it goes from blue to red. So, and then it has all the color in between. So you can really tell hardness or thickness of something based on how deep that red is. And so, like, for example, picking out fish in a brush pile makes it way easier because, the brush will be like a green, orange color. Unless it's really dense, it'll be red, but you can pick out fish because they're red dots in brush piles. So stuff like that. I really like that color separation.
That's like the original like the original live scope color, right?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Panoptics.
Yeah. Well, that's what I meant. It was like like the Lowrance blue of side scan, right?
Right.
Like that's what we all started with, and then we've all progressed from that. Okay, that's interesting.
And then what your jerkbait? Will it be red? What color is your jerkbait?
Yeah, it'll be red.
So when it
just won't be as deep, because like on something that when smaller like that, like yes, it'll be red, but it's not a blob. It's more of a sliver, so it doesn't look that deep red color.
Okay.
Whereas if you have like a thick fish, or if you're looking at like some of these piles have like a milk jug or something floating on them or stuff like that, and those will return really deep red.
Okay. So if your bait's the brightest red that it's going to be and your fish is the brightest red, then you're lined up like you're supposed to be.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I got some great videos that show that color separations. It looks pretty awesome.
Is that on your YouTube channel or Facebook or?
No, I think I just have stuff in my camera roll. I need to probably post stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I need to do that. I know I fished with Brock Bila a couple times, and he runs the blue, and I feel like I'm getting cheated on my like definition and my, it's nice to see like the nice pretty brush pile with the moss palette or something versus the blue. It's just kind of blobby and stuff. So I feel like I'm getting ripped off. Like I don't get the full animation, but It's not about that. It's about seeing what's in the brush pile.
Right. It's about seeing fish.
Did you use that same color palette with 32?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I've always used the same one. Now, like Drew, he uses just amber and uses completely different settings as me. So it looks so much different, but I think it's whatever you train your eyes to, however you can identify fish the best, I think is the important thing.
Are you running your color gain really hot?
Yes. Yeah, it's in the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then your regular gain is probably what, in the 60s, 70s?
I think this week it was mostly around 70. You adjust that based on how it looks, the bottom composition, depth, all that kind of things.
You don't probably mess with color gain a lot, do you?
No, I leave it all the same. That way it always looks the same to me.
Okay.
The good old forward-facing sonar questions. What would you do if they banned forward-facing sonar in the circuits you fish?
Keep catching bass. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the crazy thing is that people don't realize that how much more we now know about bass than we did before. Like, I know so much more about how bass set up, how they react, all of those kinds of things, to where I would be better now than I was before fishing without it. And like, I was a sophomore in college, but when I got it, so I did a lot of fishing before that, won some college tournaments. I mean, I've had a lot of fishing without forward facing sonar. And like I said, I just think that everything that you learn from looking at those fish, like before, you don't really know exactly what's going on. I mean, you catch fish and get an idea, but now I just think I would be a much more efficient angler than I was before. Um, still kind of guessing what those fish are doing, but you at least have the idea now that you've been able to see them, react and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, and I think you've got, you talked about keeping your jerkbait colors pretty simple. Like the information that you've gained fishing with forward-facing sonars probably allowed you to have confidence in just a few baits. It's like, and I could be wrong on this, but that if they're biting a jerkbait, they're gonna bite 3 different brands of jerkbaits in 2 different colors. It's not like just based on what you've thrown the last couple of years. Let's just say, if they're gonna bite a jerkbait, they're gonna bite the stunner and table rock on this day, and then maybe something with an orange belly on this day. You got a couple different jerkbaits and a couple different colors, and that's, if they're not biting those, then they're just not on a jerkbait that day. And then you can apply that to your crankbaits or whatever baits it is. So you're not going, like, if you weren't able to see what was going on, you still gain enough confidence in a few colors and a few styles. So that part has made you better as a fisherman, just having confidence, because you at one time saw the fish reacting to that bait, and that allows you to to just focus on a few different colors. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
Right.
And for me, before, I've always been like an offshore, spend a lot of time on side scan, that kind of stuff. So I mean, if we didn't have forward facing sonar, I would still be doing that. I would still, side scan at least half of my practice, no matter what, and find fish that way, and then go fish for them, blind. But I think that's just whatever you have to do to find the bass. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's the important part. As long as you're throwing in front of them.
I think that right there, what you just said, is that's one of the biggest keys to being a next level fisherman, is finding the bass, being disciplined enough to find the bass. I think that's what separates a lot of just average fishermen from better fishermen, is being disciplined to go find the bass.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you guys do better than a lot of the weekend fishermen.
Yeah, and I think from now that I've been around a lot of those seriously next level fishermen. I'm not talking about your top end of opens or whatever field, but like truly Jacob Wheeler, Drew Gill, because he is definitely one of them. All those guys, there's 2 things that make them better than everyone else, and that's being fast and efficient. Because if you watch the way that they fish, and it goes the same for anybody who is truly next level, they fish twice as fast as someone who fishes fast. I mean, it's incredible. And then they're also really good at doing it. Like, they actually are just as efficient going that fast as anybody else is going half the speed. So you got to think about how many more pieces of cover they find a day, how many more fish they see in a day. And that's why they catch so many bass in the tournaments, is because they throw at so many bass that it's unbelievable. And so I've tried to model my fishing after that, and it's really, really difficult you know, it's mentally exhausting. You really have to focus all day. And it does take some discipline to do it. And I don't do it 100% of the time by any means. And it's really hard when you're moving that fast to be able to scope well too. But that's something I'm trying to move towards because now I can see that's what all those guys have.
Yeah, and I can back you up on that too, just from you know, fishing out of the back of the boat. And I mentioned this before, but when I fished with Jake Lawrence a couple years ago in a fall tournament, a BFL, a super tournament, and that was the biggest take for me out of that day. You know, he had some sneaky minnow things that he was doing, and he caught some fish in some depths that I didn't realize fish would be in those depths. And you know, there were some sneaky little things that he did, but the biggest thing was how many spots we fished in that day. You know, we fished 50 or 60 spots in that day. And I was like, damn, this guy was going balls to the wall all day long. I mean, he had 18 and a half pounds in the live well, and he was fishing at 3:00 like he had nothing in the live well, still going hard, just going hard, man, all day long. And that's what stood out to me the most, you know, to where I would just kind of, you know, he would jump out of the seat, jump out of the cockpit, throw the trolling motor down, get after it. And if we were going from, say there was a brush pile that was 100 yards away, he wouldn't troll over there. He'd pull the trolling motor up, fire up the big motor, and do a really fast idle because he could get there twice as fast using the big motor as that's how he went all day long like that. Yeah. And, you know, it was just, it was impressive that he was that, you know, that intense. And that, to me, that opened my eyes up. Now, I can't do it either. It could be for the same reasons you just talked about. It's hard work to fish that hard all day long. I mean, the results speak for themselves. They do pay off, but you got to have the right mindset, and you got to really stay focused all day long to continue that pace.
Yeah, it's not easy.
No. And then the brakes was another cool thing. You know, he's got which Drew's got the brakes too.
Right.
Do you have brakes on your boat yet?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Can you guys have them in the opens or not?
No, we can't. That's
right. Nope. I forgot about that.
Yep. So even if I did, I would have to take them on and off all season.
Yeah, that's a pain in the butt, man. But that's a nice tool to have, you know, when you're trying.
Oh yeah, there's lots of times whenever I would like to have them, but that's all right.
Yeah, it is what it is. A couple more questions and we'll wrap it up.
Yep.
If you had 2 hours to fish with one bait and the fish were just going to crush that bait, you know, it doesn't matter what time of year, it doesn't matter the lake, you just tie on that bait and you go out to wherever and the fish are just going to go absolutely bonkers on it. What would that bait be?
It's got to be a topwater. I mean, probably a buzz bait, honestly.
Over 20 feet of water.
So many fun. I mean, like my initial thought was a hair jig, like ledge fishing. That bite is insanely fun. But if they're just gonna crush it, I would say buzz bait for sure.
Yeah,
that sounds like a good time. I want to know where that lake is.
Yeah, I know, man. It's like, for me, that question is, we all have a certain way that we like to catch them, maybe, but then there's also like some kind of ways that we don't get to catch them all that often.
Right.
You know, like I've had guys, you know, there were one guy we had on here not too long ago. He liked to catch them on a spinnerbait. So that was what he wanted to catch them on. And he'd been catching them on a spinnerbait. It's like right now, you know, saying a jerkbait. Well, we've been throwing a jerkbait for like 3 months. I'd rather throw a buzzbait, like you said, something completely different. But yeah, that's cool. Topwater's kind of like the favorite. That's like the guest favorite. It's been like some sort.
I mean, it's got to be. I mean, if you know you're gonna have fish blown up on it, I mean, why not be able to see them too? You know,
nobody has said a minnow. Like I just want to ping a minnow all day and just,
yeah, no.
The hair jig though, man, that's like a hair jig or a spoon. That's
oh my gosh, a spoon, like I love fishing a spoon, but you know the bites like you're jerking, oh it's heavy. But like a hair jig, dude, you freaking reel that thing as fast as you can, and they just want to take your rod away from you. I mean, that is such a fun bite to me.
yeah. Yeah, it is. You get to see, sometimes you get to see, that line falling slack, and then it just does
It
that.
just jumps, yeah.
It hesitates. Yeah.
Right.
You just roll down and crackle. That's fun.
I think the best part of a spoon, though, is you talk about it just gets heavy, but when you go to rip it up and you punch the butt of that rod in between two ribs and you go,
yeah.
That's when you know you got a good one.
Right.
What's up, Jermaine? Good to see you on here. What's your thoughts on Sasquatch, man? You believe it's a possibility, or
I believe it's a possibility.
Do you think it's just totally
where's the evidence, man? I mean, there's a lot of sightings, but where's the evidence at?
You think they'd find like a body or something by now, right?
Surely.
Yeah.
Government conspiracy, bud. They're covering it all up. Every time that somebody reports one, they go after them.
So so here's the theory on that, why they haven't found the body. I've heard people say that the Sasquatch, when one of their fellow members passes away, that they take the body and they bury it, or they haul it way back into a cave or an underground, tunnel or something. And that's why they remove it from the outside world. And that's why, nobody has actually found like a whole skeleton of the Sasquatch.
Well, if they do exist, they must be extremely intelligent.
Hide and seek world champion.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree. I think they're pretty smart. And then I've also heard that we're doing the Baitworks giveaway, by the way. That's why I threw that question out there. So if anybody wants to win a $25 Baitworks gift card, guess a number between 1 and 200, and whoever guesses the number that I got written down will win that gift card. But I've also heard like the reason that they can't get a picture of it is because they see the infrared beams on the trail cams and they can see it and they avoid it.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of like some James Bond 007 stuff. They just see
I thought you were just going to say because they're always blurry. They're just blurry anyway.
Well, that's another theory, that they're just blurry. That's why the pictures are always blurry. So you've never been like out on the water. Have you had anything creepy like that happen? Like maybe not a Sasquatch, but like a bear, some kind of weird, fishing at night, or just anything.
I've seen some bobcats and foxes and stuff, but never nothing crazy. Or I just don't pay enough attention, honestly. That's probably more of the
one sitting in the passenger seat. You don't even know it.
Yeah, people are like, oh, I drove right by you earlier, and I'm like, yeah, I have no idea, I didn't see you.
Yeah, they drove by you, and they said there was somebody in your boat, and he was really hairy, and you're like, really? Like, I didn't have a co-angler.
Yeah.
Who was in your boat? He was like 8.5 foot tall.
Right.
Oh, dude.
Yeah. That's when you quit looking at your screen when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You're way too focused at that front looker when a Sasquatch can actually step into your boat and you wouldn't even know it.
I'd be in the water pretty quick.
We got a winner. I just got to find him real quick. JV just sent me. I got to scroll through some of these. So what's your thoughts about the rest of the year? Like on the Toyota Series and the Opens, are you got anything you're looking forward to? Anything you're concerned about, or you feel comfortable about everything?
I feel pretty comfortable about everything. I'm really looking forward to Norfolk. I've spent some time there in the past years, and just the way it fishes. That's just a tournament I'm pretty excited about. And then, honestly, a little bit worried about the EQs, which, you got to make it there, I know, but just it's kind of a crazy schedule, honestly. Good thing it's centrally located. You don't have to travel too much.
Where did the EQs announce to?
So it's going to Champlain, and then Wheeler Lake and Okeechobee. So not centrally located. That was a joke, but That's just such a broad range.
Like,
And you have tournaments like Champlain where you can catch 1,000,000 fish and finish last.
yeah.
I mean, it's just so difficult. I mean, last year we had Invitational there, and I mean, I felt like I was on them pretty well. Had 18.5 pounds a day, and I finished like 25th. You know,
Well, I was gonna say that's a place where you can go catch 15, 16 pounds and be, in 100.
seriously, like, yeah, definitely bottom third or fourth of the field.
And thought you
So
had a pretty decent day.
yeah, exactly. So it's just that's just one of them lakes that are pretty hard, because you can catch so many fish, and it's hard to practice too whenever you're catching that many fish to go find fish that are a quarter or a half pound heavier. That's just something I don't have a lot of experience with yet either. And then Wheeler Lake, I mean, we went there for the uh, Toyota Championship last year, and I feel like that one's going to be fine. But then Okeechobee, I mean, I would assume that Okeechobee in November is going to be better than it is in January, February when tournaments generally go there. I mean, they're not going to be spawning; they're actually going to be pre-spawn and probably feeding. I mean, I don't know how it is, but I'm sure the weights are going to be better than normal.
Man, I think that Norfolk Derby is going to be that's going to be interesting to see how it.
Dude, I think it's going to be. I'm so excited for it. It's going to be a blast. There's a ton of fish in Norfolk. Now the size is not super great.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's part of the reason I'm looking forward to it, because I know I'm going to catch a lot of fish, and be able to cull up my bag, and there's good fish of all three species there, all four if you include meanmouth. So, and I feel like, I mean, the rivers are pretty good, but I feel like a lot of guys are just going to get all on top of each other doing that kind of thing. So, I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I remember that being a problem in some of the BFL regionals there. It's like, especially when there's if there was a shallow pattern, it's like there's only so much water out there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of small. Yeah, Mark Williams, get a hold of me. Congratulations. Yeah, Curtis was talking about the Big O. What an elite event. That was a good one, man. It was good to see Paul.
Drama.
Yeah, that was crazy.
And he caught that 5-something pounder on the Boss. I think that's a clutch swim bait. I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. We'll wrap it up, man. Thanks for hanging out with us, Cole. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Congratulations again.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, good luck, man. Catch them up next couple of days and the rest of the year. Hopefully,
I'm gonna need some luck this week, I think.
You know what to do, man. You just got to make it happen.
Yeah, we'll see.
So,
I feel like this can be a very tough leg at times.
Yeah, but everybody's fishing the same conditions.
Exactly right.
So,
that's
all right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us. We do this every Tuesday night. Hope to see you next week. Until next time.